Welcome, everyone. Make sure that you avail yourself of the handouts that are in the rear of the room. I noticed some folks came in before we really I didn't get them set up in time, so please avail yourself of that. My name is Randy Vidal. I am a member of the Economic Development Commission and also the Redevelopment Agency. And I welcome you all here this evening for public information on the transit-oriented district, what it means, what benefits we feel this district will do for the town of Stratford Center. And we have several speakers. Now, the format of tonight's meeting is that we'll have the speakers, and then there'll be a Q&A capability at the end of the speakers' presentations. And we will have a remote mic, so you won't have to be running up and down. And hopefully give everybody in the audience an opportunity to ask whatever question they have so we can provide an answer. Again, our purpose is to be fully informative, so that when we leave here tonight, any questions we may have are answered. Let me start off by welcoming, of course, our mayor, John Harkins. And we have Karen Kaiser and Amy Knorr from Economic Development. And our speakers are Tim Sullivan, the Deputy Commissioner of DECD. Christine Kazanza, who is a TOS grant writer. And Jim Olson from T & Bond, their environmental firm. And also on the dais is Matt Folden from MetroCog. And we have Patrick Cotton from Traffic Analysis. He's got some statistics so we can answer your questions regarding traffic. Tina Beitar, our Conservation Director. Jay Habansky, a Planning Administrator. And last but not least, Janet Robinson, Board of Ed Superintendent. Is she here this evening? Chris Barnaby is going to be representing the Board of Ed. So, let's kick off the program. Tim, from our Deputy Commissioner from DECD, we welcome you.
Well, good evening. It's great to be here with you. I appreciate the chance to visit with you for a few minutes and share some context for why the state's been partnering with Town of Stratford on this project to date, and tell you some of the reasons and where this sort of fits in some of the state's investment strategies and development strategies across the state and how it fits into that context. I'll be relatively brief and just share with you some data and again some context of how this fits into our overall development strategy, but then hopefully leave lots of time for questions. I know there's lots of interest in the project, and want to make sure there's plenty of time to answer as many as we can. And I think there's going to be a description of how the grant came to be and where this fits in the timeline of the development of the TOD district. But with that, I'll advance my slides. So just stepping back a little bit, just to set this, the slide describes this appropriately as a gross oversimplification of economic trends. But we've seen a transition in the economy from kind of agricultural and agrarian economy to sort of the industrial age economy, and into really the knowledge and information economy. And with that, kind of your locational advantages, the things you're trying to compete for, the key aspects of your competitive advantage have changed as well. Right? Agrarian age, having rich soil and good climate, and all the things that make farms work was sort of the key competitive advantage and your ability to get those products to market. In the industrial age, being located with some proximity to the commodities and natural resources you needed. There's a reason that Houston is where Houston is. It's because it's near the oil, and Pittsburgh is where Pittsburgh is, and the cities and towns that grew up all throughout the country have both access to the natural resources they need and the ability to get those products to market. And as that era has faded and receded and given way to the sort of knowledge and information economy, the key component is, of competitive advantage has really changed. It's talent, it's people. And that's true in high tech. It's true in sort of the digital media and all the sort of sexy startup companies that everyone's excited to see grow here in Connecticut. But it's true in really every aspect of the economy. It's the businesses and the companies that are growing and thriving and succeeding are ones where there's significant human capital, whether that's in advanced manufacturing, whether that's in again high tech, financial services, even in manufacturing. You see Brad sitting in the front row over here from Two Roads thinking about people who know how to make beer. That's a skill and a talent and a human capital advantage that gets matched with financial capital and how that makes sense. So the point of this is to win the war for talent, and that is the war for talent is the central competitive factor of the 21st century economy. And so, Connecticut cities and towns need to be competitive in that competition for talent. People need to want to be here. They need to want to live here. They need to want to work and play here. And so that's a really important context and backdrop for what we're talking about today. And next slide. You can click it on then. Some of this is about just talking about some trends in our economy. And these are nationwide and global trends. For the first time in human history, 50% of the world's population lives in cities. Cities are defined as anything over like 50,000 people, and that's projected to grow to 70% by 2050 again because people want to be in cities. And importantly, and not just cities, they want to be in downtowns, they want to be in walkable communities, and by the way, no one is suggesting that we turn into a big city. But it's manifesting, it's not just that people want to be in cities because it's cool and fun to be in Brooklyn and have a cool outfit and a hat and whatever, and live in Brooklyn and have all those cool things. It's driving fundamentals of our economy about people making their location decisions, and it's a durable trend over time. 86% of young people, 8.5 out of 10 people who are millennials, who are driving the economy of the future, report that they think it's important to have opportunities to live and work where they don't need a car. 86% report that that's a really important factor for them in thinking about where they want to live and work and build their lives. And importantly, that's of course then translating through to businesses who are seeking to retain and attract that talent. 83% of office tenants say that they want to be in mixed-use, walkable neighborhoods. That's true in big cities, it's true in smaller communities. Office tenants, commercial tenants want to be in walkable, livable, mixed-use communities. And again, that is then flowing through even further into sort of where the job growth has happened in the country. These numbers are getting a little stale. They're 2007 to 2011, but from sort of before the recession through the coming out phase of the recession, city centers saw about 0.5% job growth. Everywhere else saw a slight decline. Jobs are being created, jobs are being attracted, jobs are being retained in city centers. That's defined as places that are, again, walkable, mixed-use, transit-oriented, that have access to these kinds of assets. And so these are really important fundamental trends in the economy as we think about repowering and reinvigorating our cities and our downtowns. These are really important trends we think to think and keep in mind. Next slide. And there's a whole bunch of academic research that backs that up. That's what that picture's there to show. Next slide. And again, it's not just New York and Boston and Chicago and San Francisco that are doing this. There are cities and towns of lots of different shapes and sizes all throughout the country that are harnessing the power of this kind of development that we're talking about here in Stratford and really across the state. That is, again, mixed use, walkable, transit-oriented, and repowering our cities and downtowns, places that were, in some cases, kind of left for dead. A city like Chattanooga is a great example. Chattanooga was a manufacturing hub and an industrial hub in the southeast, nestled in the middle of the Smoky Mountains with terrible, terrible air pollution when the factories were fully operating. And if you ask people in 1970 or 1980 how was the future looking for Chattanooga, I think you would have seen pretty grim, glum responses to that question. But instead what they said was, well, let's take the attributes we do have. We got a river, they do have train service that connects them to the Chattanooga Choo Choo, that's what the song is about. And they built gig internet, they put some public internet in there. And they invested into things like pedestrian bridges and turning some of their old factories into housing. And all of a sudden, not only is Chattanooga booming downtown, into sort of a restaurant and business way. It's also attracting startup activity. It's attracting about $70 million of venture capital investing every year. Again, in a city that, a small city, relatively small city, was left for dead because of some smart targeted investments in walkable, mixed-use, transit-oriented type developments. And there's lots of other ones I can go through. Lowell, Mass. has sort of become I guess it's regionally famous, not really famous, but it's regionally famous at least for repowering its mills and getting them back into productive reuse. Even really small towns like Great Barrington. Great Barrington has sort of positioned itself, again, it was sort of left for dead, but it's positioned itself as sort of the little urban, cool, small town in the middle of the Berkshires. And it attracts people and visitors and restaurants, and has really made that a great place to live and work, and their economy is doing much better than the surrounding region. Because they have made investments in livability and walkability and connections to bikes and all those kinds of fun things. So these are all things to consider as we're thinking about how to repower and grow our economy and reposition our cities and towns for the 21st century economy. Next slide. And this is a list of things I go through. These are a list of things I go through whenever I talk about this. But the most important asset, the most important attribute for predicting the success and whether or not you're going to be able to kind of repower and reposition your downtown and your economy is, do you have transit? And Stratford has this tremendous asset that is the Metro North Line and the Amtrak line coming through. It's an enormous asset that most towns would give, would trade almost anything for, because it gives you connections not only to New York but to Boston and to all the communities around on the Connecticut side. It's a tremendous asset. It gives, use this metaphor in a meeting just before, it gives Stratford a really good hand of cards to play. It's up to you how to play it and what you choose to do with it, but it's a tremendous asset to have that kind of connectivity, that kind of ridership, that kind of potential for building the kind of transit-oriented development, mixed-use developments that people want around these kinds of train stations. And so that's what we're here to talk about tonight. The next slide. I can skip through this stuff. All of which is to say, mixed-use development around transit is kind of the name of the game in the development world. And that's what developers are interested in, that's what tenants are interested in, that's what all the research suggests as durable fundamental trends, that people want these kinds of, people as residents, people as employees and businesses want these kinds of neighborhoods, want these kinds of, these developments. So, and importantly, in Connecticut, we have this opportunity around, next slide, around brownfields. And Connecticut has made a major investment in brownfield redevelopment. A brownfield is any site where, because of contamination, and there's lots of different forms of contamination, Jim's an environmental expert, I'll let him talk about all the various forms of contamination there are in the world, but basically, anywhere where contamination is holding back the ability to redevelop a site, like a factory, any building with hazardous building materials, which we'll talk about in a moment. And the state has made a major investment in these sites. We've actually made some more investments since the slide was put together. About $173 million of state funding invested in cleaning up these old sites and putting them back to productive reuse. And importantly, stretching the leverage of those dollars, bringing in private development to repower these sites that in some cases have been abandoned for 10, 20, 30, 40 years to finally get them moving again. And so again, we think that's a really important public policy ambition and goal, because these are sites that without some modest public, without some spark initial public investment, won't get redeveloped. We know this when the economy's been great, when the economy has been middling, when the economy has been poor, these sites don't get redeveloped without some help, because the market, the costs of remediation, the cost of contamination make the projects unviable without that support. And we have success stories all across the state. I can point to, next slide. I won't go through these in detail, but examples all across the state where we're taking brownfields, putting them back to productive reuse for a whole range of uses, for energy in a city-owned site in Bridgeport, for housing in lots of these, for new tech and commercial space in New Haven, for new entertainment and recreation space in Preston. Cities and towns of different sizes and types, and locations, and urban places and rural places are making these investments to try and get our old infrastructure, our old sites, our previously developed sites back to productive reuse. And we think it's really important, redeveloping brownfields is really important for lots of reasons. One of them, and this gets a little bit lost in the shuffle sometimes, if you think about what makes Connecticut special, a great place to live and work and play, it's that balance we have between developed sites and our cities and our downtowns and our natural environment, our parks and our forests and our farmland. And if you care about economic growth, if you care about growing the job base, if you care about growing the population and preserving that balance, the only way you can achieve both of those goals at the same time is redeveloping sites that have already been developed, sites that are in the middle of existing infrastructure, that have the utilities, that have the roads and connections to utilities and have the density surrounding them that makes them the right places to redevelop versus knocking down more forests, plowing under farmland, et cetera, to make room for the jobs and the housing that we need to grow the economy. So we think this is a really important ambition and something we spend a lot of time on. My colleague Cynthia Petrozello is here. She's the project manager for this project and lots of other projects as well. And if there's any really hard questions, I will put her on the griddle with me. But this is a really important effort that we made at the state. Governor Malloy's made a major investment in partnering with cities and towns and partnering with mayors like Mayor Harkins to put these sites back to productive use and make the kind of grants that we're talking about tonight. And one last example, since this is a fairly gratuitous, just commercial for it, next slide. For a success story, of course, is Two Roads, which is by far the most delicious and tasty and fun brownfield redevelopment that I've stumbled upon, at least. I don't know, Brad's in the front row, he can tell you the story. I don't need to do their marketing, they do a great marketing job for themselves, but a great success story of turning an old factory that was abandoned for years, nothing happening, and now there's 90 plus people working there. There's activity every day, people coming in from out of state for their festivals and programs and all that kind of great stuff at a site that was doing nothing for years. It's a great example of putting these sites, these abandoned sites, these vacant sites, back to productive reuse, and it's one of our great success stories. I use this as a success story when I'm in lots of towns, not just in Stratford, but it seems particularly appropriate to talk about it here, because it is such a great success story and so emblematic of what you can do when you repower and retool existing sites that have been unproductive for years. So with that, I think that's the end of my slides. One more? That's it. That is the end of my slides. I'm happy to take lots of questions when we get to it, unless there's anything I didn't cover. Karen, you want me to mention? So again, happy to take lots of questions once the rest of the panelists speak, or my team. Questions at the end, if that's okay. Great, thanks.
I'm happy to welcome Christina Cosenza, TOS grant writer, very familiar with Stratford and grant writing over the years. Tina, you're up.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As you said, my name is Christina Kazanis, and I'm the grants director for the town. I've been with the town since 2008. I've worked with 2 mayoral administrations now. And basically, my job is pretty simple. I go get money. I find grant opportunities. I work with the departments and the commissions and committees to identify what the town's priorities are. And I develop grant applications to help us get grant funding from state sources, federal sources, private sources when we can for those priorities. And that includes all departments, police, fire, health department, economic development, public works. So I sort of wander a lot and get to see a lot of what happens in the town. It's a really interesting job, and I'm very honored to have been doing it with you and for you for the past 8 years. The first grant proposal that I ever wrote and got for the town back in 2008 was the $50,000 grant from the Tri-State Transportation Campaign. And I worked very heavily with Dave Killeen, the former town planner, to think about an angle for an application. And the 2 of us, along with Duncan Yetman, came to the conclusion that what we needed to do first in order to promote transit-centered development was to teach people what transit-centered development was. And we knew that something that this big and this important in Stratford was not going to happen unless there was very significant community input. And not just community input, we wanted this feasibility study to be community driven. And so we crafted this application to the Tri-State Transportation Campaign with that goal in mind. And I also just want to point out that there were a number of grants given out that year. We were the only grantee in Connecticut. They gave them out in New Jersey and communities in upstate New York. We were the only one in Connecticut to get a grant. And from that grant came this feasibility study in 2010 after a series of workshops and charrettes that really focused on teaching people about what transit center development was, what kind of opportunities it creates, and to get input on what people might want to see and not want to see. And from that came a number of recommendations to the town on how to proceed with transit center development. Two of them are particularly important tonight when we're talking about Stratford Center and the Center School site. The first recommendation that was made was a really great recommendation that unfortunately we couldn't proceed with. We wanted to find a way, and basically the consultants who we hired to lead us through this process helped us realize that if we wanted to make Stratford Center walkable, we wanted to make it less traffic congested, that reorienting our train station to the area where Bally's is was probably the best way to do that, so that you didn't have people coming through Stratford Center to go to this train station. Instead, along with the development of an exit 33, you would use Route 1, Barnum Avenue, Route 1, to go to basically go to the parking lot and the rail station. Unfortunately, after we tried to investigate that path, it was not feasible. The owner of Bally's did not want to sell his property. And that, to us, was the end of that. It was a tremendous opportunity that we just could not capitalize on. One of the other main recommendations in the feasibility study was, and if you ever get your hands on a copy and look through it, every other page talks about the need for parking. That there are, and I'm going to leave the discussion about the traffic study and et cetera to the folks who actually did the study. But if transit-oriented development is going to result in the kind of residential mixed-use development that we want to see, we need parking. And right now, any given day, any given hour during the workday, if you go downtown, what's there? There are cars parked there. And they're parked there for hours and hours and hours, which means that the businesses down there don't have enough parking to be able to get enough, to attract enough customers to do the kind of business they need to do. And that's why, a big reason why we've seen a lot of restaurants cycle in and out, with the exception of Acapulco's, et cetera. So, with that in mind, I'm sorry, I lost my space. The other thing that came out of the study was the need, and Tim actually mentioned this, was the need to look at adaptive reuse opportunities. In other words, since we have so little undeveloped land in town, how do we utilize our existing assets in the TOD district in the best and most impactful way? And one of the things that came out of the feasibility study was the need to respect the fact that this is a historic district, that whatever we do, however TOD development looks, it respects the way that Stratford Center looks, it respects its history, it respects the fact that it is a historic district. Tim had mentioned before that one of Connecticut's biggest pluses is that it has this great mix of sort of urban and suburban communities with natural assets. I would actually go one step more and suggest that Connecticut, probably more than any state that I can think of, maybe not Massachusetts, maybe Massachusetts too, lives in its history. People in Connecticut own very, very old homes. We go to parks that are 200-300 years old. We live in our history, and our history is tangible. And that is something that transit-oriented development can and should respect. And the reason why I pointed that out is because when we're looking at opportunities for TOD development, for TOD-related development in Stratford Center, there are processes in place by which we can make sure that the design standards we develop, that anything that comes through for approval has a public process that involves public input into what these things look like, and that we find compromise between wishes and needs. And that's really important when you're doing transit-oriented development. So I'm gonna fast forward a bit and sort of talk a little bit about from that $50,000 grant, what happened. We've been able in the past 6 years to basically use that $50,000 grant from Tri-State Transportation Campaign and the feasibility study and turn it into roughly $7 million worth of grant funding for the town for transit-oriented development, district-related activities. Oh, it's up there, and of course I can't read it because it's blurry. Some of those include, we received 2 grants actually from state of Connecticut for the TOD pilot grant for roughly about $425,000 to do a lot of that planning work, to do different types of studies. We have 2 EPA brownfields assessment grants for a total of about $800,000 to do investigation of brownfields, contaminated properties, with the TOD as one of the areas of interest, the other being the south end. We also have received cleanup funding for properties within and adjacent to the transit-oriented development, the TOD district. That includes $200,000 that we received from the EPA for Mercer Coal, plus another 200 or so thousand from Connecticut Metropolitan, I'm sorry, I keep calling them MetroCog, but nobody knows what I'm talking about. Metropolitan Council of Governments. They have the EPA Brownfields Revolving Loan Fund, and we received a sub-grant from them as well. And then from the state of Connecticut, we received actually 4 very significant grants. 2 of them for projects in the TOD district. One is contract plating. We received $2.85 million to remediate that site. And the other being the Center School and Board of Education site for a little over $1.2 million. I did this graphic just to show you the impact of that $50,000 grant and that feasibility study, and to show you that, look, I've been doing grant writing for over 20 years. And the one thing that I know about funders is that they don't fund problems, they fund solutions. And when I came on board with Stratford, we did not have a solution for what to do around economic development. And once we started investigating transit center development and we started putting that into our grant applications, the money literally came flowing in. We were not on anybody's radar before, and suddenly we were rock stars. And we got a lot of money in a very small amount of time because we had this vision. And I think it's important to say that. I'm not trying to say it as a scare tactic, but some of the things that I've been hearing about people's opinions about TOD and what should happen with it, I'll just put it out there. If we go backwards and we don't sort of continue on the path that we're going down with transit-oriented development, We are not going to be competitive for a lot of the community development and economic development grants that are out there. They want to see how we're going to make Stratford a sustainable community that can meet 21st century challenges. And without transit center development as a strategy, I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know how to tell that story to a funder who wants to invest money. We have a good thing going here, and I'm gonna go off script a little bit and put on or take off my town hall hat and speak to you as a resident. I've been working here, like I said, for the past 8 years, and I've had to learn a lot about the town, different areas, in order to write effectively for you. And what I've learned about Stratford is that it is a wonderful community. I grew up in Stamford. Totally different feel, completely different feel from Stratford. What I love most about Stratford is that people stay here, or if they had left, they came back. There's a sense of history, there's a sense of family here that I really liked, and it led me 2 years ago to purchase a home here. A cute little bungalow off of Stratford Avenue, tucked behind Forest City. And I love it. I love my neighbors, I love my house, I love my neighborhood. I had 300 kids come to my house trick-or-treating for Halloween. 1,000 pieces of candy. And I really love it. And I know that this room is full of people who have spent their entire lives here, who grew up here. I did not grow up here, but I do plan on growing old here. And I bought my house not just to have a home, but I bought it as a strategic investment. I'm single. I probably will stay single. So I need to have an asset that I know is going to be worth something to me, whether it's a home or, God forbid, something happens and I need to sell it. And I bought a house smack dead between the Transit Center Development District and the Stratford Army Engine Plant. That was on purpose. And I did it because I knew what was going on, I knew what was happening in Stratford, I knew we were moving forward with this, and that was a good thing. And I shudder to think what might happen if we back away from that. You know, I'm not opposed to a conversation about why a parking garage would worry people. That is a legitimate concern. But it's not just about a parking garage, it's about a tool to make transit center development happen. And I'm looking forward to that conversation, but what I'm not looking forward to is a whole lot of no's without being accompanied by realistic alternatives. And as your grants director, I'm really not looking forward to leaving millions of dollars on the table because we're drowning in a sea of no's. Thank you.
I missed my chance for the 1,001 candy bar. Thank you, Christina. I'd like to introduce Jim Olson from DM Bond Environmental Company. As you all know, regardless of where we are in Connecticut, it's always an issue, and it's always a challenge. So, Jim, I'm looking forward to hearing about our environmental. Thank you. Good evening.
And I'm Jim Olson from Time Bond. I'm the principal in charge of this project with me, Kevin McCarthy. Kevin did all the field work and inspection on the property. So we were hired by the town to do a hazardous building material assessment at the center school. Time Bond is on the town's list of on-call environmental consultants. We've been working with the town for several years on a number of projects, Stratford Army Engine Plant, contract plating. So, you know, we're really looking forward to working on a new project. So we were hired basically to assess the building for hazardous building materials, develop a cleanup plan and specifications and estimated cleanup cost for that. Go back one. A little history. The school was built in 69 to 70, and it's about 34,000 square feet. And that date is significant because around that time, the 50s, 60s, early 70s is when they used a lot of hazardous building materials in schools and other structures. So we did our inspection. I won't go into all the excruciating detail on samples and all that, but we found, no surprise, multiple hazardous building materials. You know, asbestos mixed with PCBs, PCBs by itself, lead-based paints, and universal waste. Universal waste are things like bulbs, ballasts, and thermostats, and things like that. And some of the major materials where we found these HBMs is some of the dam proofing and waterproofing tar on the foundation. Also in the mastic and carpet glue. You can see there's a picture there where it's peeled back. Also paint. There's a photo to the upper right. A lot of these paints used in this period of time had PCBs in them. They added PCBs to make the paints more durable. And that was done from like the 50s all the way up till 78 when PCBs were banned. And also we found PCBs and this urethane coating on the gym floor. It made the urethane more durable. That's just a drawing showing the distribution of HBMs throughout the school. And then we looked at a couple scenarios, what would be involved technically and from a cost standpoint for a demolition versus a renovation scenario. So for demolition, you have to do complete removal and disposal of the HBM in accordance with federal and state laws. And some of the things that were increasing the cost, and I'll get to cost on a couple slides, where there's about 700 cubic yards of PCB containing block, and that's like CMU block you see over here on the walls, that style of construction. And also about 500 cubic yards of asbestos containing material and dam proofing. So you look at these volumes and they do add up. The cost to go and remove them, truck them to a licensed disposal facility, the cost can add up. And if you're gonna do a renovation, basically you have to basically manage and dispose anything you disturb during those renovations or anything that's damaged. So there's some things that can remain on site because if they're in good shape and they're not deteriorating and exposing people to asbestos and PCBs, such as the damp proofing and the PCB contaminated block. But with a PCB contaminated block, we'd have to strip off the paint first, which that building being an older building, that paint flakes, and we have to remove the stuff that's flaked off and basically encapsulate that with a barrier. And that's been a laborious process and costs money. And then if you do that and you encapsulate it, essentially what you're doing, you're leaving some PCBs behind in the block that you can't get out, but it requires an O&M. So you have to go in every year and do air sampling and wipe sampling, for basically into the future. And we did a cost, it's about $20,000 a year to do that. Next one. So here's a cost comparison between the two. You can see we broke down all the costs, and the total cost for a demolition scenario is about $1.68 million. For the abatement, building demo, site work, oversight. And then for a renovation scenario, 1.56 million. That includes abatement, putting together a plan to handle the PCBs and leave some in place or remove some from the building. The O&M program, which we ran out 20 years, which does add up over that period of time, and even beyond 20 years, you'll continue to have to do it. 1.56 million. On top of that, the actual cost just to come in and renovate the school. We talked to one of the town's architects, Antonozzi, and based on a similar project, it was a high school project, we're looking at about $365 a square foot, or 12.5 million. And that there's additional costs, site work and things like that really could add up on a renovation scenario. That's it.
Thank you, Jim. Now is our opportunity for questions and answers. We have a remote microphone. Chris, would you, in the audience? And we'd like to give everybody an opportunity to ask their questions. So I need somebody to handle the mic. I'll do my best to keep track.
Sure. Hi, I'm a resident of the 7th District, Hilltop Drive, North End, nowhere near the garage. Just have a question for the panel and the Economic Development Department. We're talking a lot tonight about repurposing, rebuilding, reusing existing structures. We're talking about destinations where people can arrive by rail and walk. And I'm just wondering if anybody involved with the committee or the Economic Development Department has ever seen the building on Elm Street. It's rather large. It's very important to history. I've heard talk of history, preserving our history, and living in our history. It's very much involved with the history of Stratford. I read with interest a quote from Dolly Parton, of all people, tonight on one of your slides. Know who you are and then do it with purpose. We are Stratford. We are Stratford. We have a brand. I love Two Roads too, and I love what it's done for Stratford. But we had a brand before they came. And I do not understand why the economic development folks just don't reuse, repurpose, rebuild, walk in history, arrive by rail, walk to that building, and bring Stratford back to its glory days. So that is my question. Have you seen the building on Elm Street?
I have a good question. Can we have someone from Economic Development answer that?
I'm assuming you're talking about Shakespeare Theater.
Oh my God.
And
Oh my God. Okay. Oh my God.
are you talking about the White House in front? What are you talking about Shakespeare Theater?
Yes.
Thank you. I believe that a town council selected a company to redevelop that, and the new town council came in and stopped speaking with them and stopped talking with them. So economic development has been, and the town and the town council have been trying to redevelop that property with private developer. One was selected, and then the new town council came in and stopped negotiating. So that has been done.
I think we're here to talk about Center School and the current project, and Shakespeare Theater does not fall within the TOD. We have our Deputy Commissioner here to speak about Center School and the current grant. If you'd like to ask a question about this particular project, that would be great.
This is not quite about Center School, it's about the TOD, which all the talking was about, with Center School being one of them. When the TOD was adopted, it looked good because it had mixed use and it made a lot of sense. And if you look in the regs, you see all the pretty pictures like you have up here. But it's only been used for housing and not mixed use. I have a question out of this. The one approved and the one proposed development on Ferry Boulevard are both unattractive boxes, don't have adequate parking, and they do not have easy or safe walking access either to the center or to the shopping center behind it. I mean, you would need a walk light on the entrance to the turnpike in order to get over to safely get over to the parking area. So, my question is, Why aren't we requiring mixed use and good design and good sidewalks and crossing lights to be able to walk to the shopping center and the transit? I mean, if you haven't done it, how can we believe that you're going to do a better job on Center School?
Thank you. That's a question for Jay Hibansky, our planning administrator.
Hi. I've actually gotten this question a lot. And, you know, as the transit-oriented development district matures, I think as the transit-oriented development district matures, we will see more mixed-use development. Currently, without the density that supports small businesses and restaurants and other retail establishments, I think it's going to be a challenge to require mixed-use development everywhere. Now, the regulations do require activated ground floor space, such as cafes or libraries or any other activated commercial space. Just currently, we just haven't had any applications that have come in. Now, keep in mind, a planning project, a planning initiative has a duration, has a long range perspective of up to 20, 30 years. These regulations got adopted just over a year ago, so I think it's a valid comment. You know, why aren't we seeing any development in this area, or in the area where retail or activated space is required? So I think as it matures and you start seeing more people to support the businesses, you're going to start seeing more developers taking advantage in providing some of these activated spaces on the ground floor.
We're also in the very, very beginning baby stages of a TOD. This doesn't happen overnight. It was only passed 2 years ago, the overlay. The overlay has many more restrictions than the original regulations. It protects the historic integrity of the community. It involves community involvement. That's why we're all standing here right now. Nothing can go through, everything that goes on in town, any project, goes through the same process. It goes to the zoning commission, which has its public input. It goes to planning, zoning, BZA, and then to the town council as well for the new project adoption. I'm sorry, what did you say? Well, yeah, it could, but that's part of the
We
process.
didn't hear what you said.
She just said where it usually gets squashed, and I said, yes, it could, that's part of the process.
Karen.
Is there any reason why you're not calling these people that have their hands up?
Yeah, we'll get to you, I promise.
I just stopped speaking about a second ago, I'm trying to get out. Thank you.
Escapes and it's the apartment buildings. And I think we all need to have a big view of everything that's going on, not just Center School. But it does seem exciting. I think it has some good potential. I would suggest to everyone here as well that we need to stay very involved and very informed and stay on top of our elected officials to make sure that what they are approving is appropriate and make sure that we're not losing track of that. Thank you.
I'd like to give someone an opportunity who hasn't
Right
spoken.
here, in the middle. Sonia.
My name is Sonia Devitt, and I live in Hilltop Drive in Stratford, so I'm not down in the center. But I've lived in many, both urban and suburban areas, and I'm very committed to the idea of transit-oriented development. I think it makes a lot of sense. But I'm very puzzled by the saying that it's too preliminary to talk about the parking garage and the traffic, but it's not too preliminary to talk about the Center School project when it's very much an integral, they're integrated as part. I've read your plan, I've read that inch-thick book. I've studied the Center School pages made copies of them for my acquaintances and friends, and urged them to take a look at it. And as I look at that, I do not see how we can say to one person, well, it's too early to talk about the parking garage, we're in an early stage, and then to say, but with regard to Center School, this is something that's part of the presentation, when it's all part of the same block and neighborhood. And I'm thinking, I would like to ask why we're not, I'm just asking that. How is it that it's integrated in your plan, your booklet and everything, but it's too preliminary to talk about one thing and it's trying to interest us in the other?
What I said to this gentleman here who lived on the corner was more to the point that he had posed his question as if the garage was a done deal. And I just wanted to assure him that it was not. It's not. When we applied for the funding, we had to talk about potential end uses, or if we had an end use. If we had an end use already determined what that was, we didn't, because we didn't. So we put in, because of the feasibility study, we put in the possibility of a garage. Now there have been, discussions about what that would look like. Is it feasible? That's why we did these studies. But it's not. Nobody's putting a shovel into ground to build a parking garage right now. That's what I meant. So I'm sorry if I misled you, if I said something incorrectly. Did I?
But
location's already determined.
if that block, if that neighborhood, if that block is central to the transit-oriented district, then how can you talk about what you're going to do with Center School without that component when traffic is so much a juggernaut where it is right as it is right now?
I'm not sure how to answer your question other than how I did.
I want to take it back a step. So obviously before a parking garage, any mixed-use development can go up at the Center School site, first of all, we need to know what is inside Center School. We found from the environmentals that there are hazardous building materials associated with it. It's going to be cost prohibitive to renovate it as a school. It's going to be cost prohibitive to leave that school in place and renovate it really as anything. The state has given us $1.2 million to take down the school and use it for transit-oriented development. So we have a bird in the hand, and we have a plan in place to get rid of a school that the Board of Ed has categorically stated they don't want the school. Why are we still having to incur the cost of maintaining this school as a school when it's not being used? It's not a good use of our resources. So no matter what we do in the TOD in that area moving forward, Center School, in my opinion, does not need to be there. It's holding us back from making the best use of that property.
So the TOD is influenced by free money coming from the state. Let's move beyond this now.
I finished your question. I can't answer.
Right? And maybe we need a vote for people to say we want to slow down some of the development. Maybe that's what you have to follow. Maybe the people here are voting, they want less development.
I personally disagree.
I have a question. We talked about some significant grant money that's been allocated to the town for a variety of projects. Is there a sunset on that money, or do the grants expire at some point? It'd be good to know that if there's a clock ticking about getting the information and then making some decisions that have to be made.
All grants that we have, all grants that we get have a start date and an end date. And they're all different. So are you talking about the 1.2 million?
Yeah, the 1.2 million, but the aggregate, you had about 5.9 million.
It's about 7, yeah.
And there must be different dates that follow each of those grants. If that's the case, and that money's been appropriated for certain projects, if it expires, our opportunity to use it goes with that.
So part of my job is to work with the funders, so if we need more time, we can get more time to extend those contracts as long as we possibly can to get the job done.
Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Farrington Posner, and I am the 2nd District Town Councilman, the district that encompasses the entire TOD. 2 of my constituents, who live smack in the middle of the historic district, since this question and answers have started, have been repeatedly passed over to speak. Mr. Yem and Mr. Goodrich, and I would like them to be allowed to speak tonight.
I don't know why you're so angry. I've been standing there for 10 minutes with everybody around you speaking. Other people in the room would like to speak.
Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tom Yem. I'm a resident of the Historic District. I'm a former chair of the Historic District Commission. I also sat on the 2 transit-oriented development study committees in 2010, and also the 10-year town plan of conservation and development in 2013. I've also had a lot of communications with Tim Sullivan of the DECD, and I want to thank him on behalf of all of us for coming down from Hartford tonight to talk to us. And I have a question for you, Tim, and I know I warned you that you're coming into a buzzsaw here, so I want to make a couple of points, some of which have been made by others, and then I'd like to ask you to respond. First of all, I'd like to say Center School is a viable asset to a revitalized town center. DECD is subsidizing the destruction of Stratford's historic district. 2 planning studies, the 2 I mentioned, insist that parking needs need to be elsewhere. We've talked about Bollies. Residents in the surrounding neighborhood do not want a garage. They're here tonight. Destruction of Center School delegitimizes the TOD concept. DECD also, some of you may know, awarded a grant to the David Reed Group on Shakespeare last year. So this is a second strike. It's not looking good. This new town council may vote next week to stop the Center School demolition process. And the zoning commission may move on its own to stop or halt the TOD. Thank you.
I will do my best to answer as many of them as I can recall. The ones I forget to shut up. Thank you. Yeah, as it relates to the historic district, my understanding there, just sidebarring about that, the school itself is not, in the historic district. It is adjacent to it.
Your microphone.
Can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Is that better?
Yes. Hold
Great.
it up to your mouth. Yes.
Take it off the stand.
All right. That's really casual. My understanding is that this has been what the town has told me that the school itself is not in the historic district. It is immediately adjacent. I get that. Again, to sort of relate to answer, I think your fundamental question about what the town council may do or may not do. This is an application that came to us from the town 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, that had the support of the mayor and I think the council at the time. If the town doesn't want to do the project, that's wouldn't be the decision I would make, but that's we won't proceed with the funding if the town council or the leadership of the town doesn't want to do the project. It's, I think, pretty simple. An application came to us, we responded, we liked the project. If the town no longer likes the project, we've got, frankly, more projects out there that are looking to move forward that we have funding to provide them. So if the town doesn't want to do the project, I don't mean that pejoratively or disrespectfully, so that's the mayor. If the town doesn't want to do the project, it's okay. With me. I'm sure you'd sure the grant should be upset if we take it back.
Yeah, I would be very upset if we give it back. I'm not in the habit of giving away money, I'm in the habit of getting money. And I will also say that in general, you know, I've been doing grant writing, I think I mentioned before, for over 20 years for nonprofit organizations. I have my own consulting firm. I work for the City of Bridgeport Central Grants Office, and I've worked for the town. And I can tell you without hesitation and reservation that giving back grant money is a very bad idea. We run the risk of coming off. We run the risk of coming off like we are a bad steward of public funds. We look like we are an unreliable investment, and I am incredibly concerned that if we give this money back, we may not see another dime of it for a very long time for things that we do want. You don't accept grant money and then give it back.
I kind of ran over time, and I wish we could accommodate everybody. I would encourage more public hearings. I've learned a lot. I hope you guys have learned a lot. This is going to be something that is going to be continuing. And I want to thank everybody for coming this evening and participating in the process. Thank you.